All right, let's dive right into a question that seems simple but is actually, well, pretty complex. Who really has to pay tax in India? Now, you might think it's all about your passport, but it's not. It's about your calendar. And this affects everyone, from a CEO flying around the globe to someone working part-time abroad. So let's get into it. So to kick things off, let's just throw a big name out there. Is Elon Musk's income, the money he makes in the US, taxable here in India? I mean, your gut reaction is probably no way, of course not, right? But with tax law, your gut instinct can sometimes lead you astray. And look, in this case, the answer is no. But the reason why has absolutely nothing to do with him being an American citizen or where his companies are based. It's all about something way simpler. It's literally about counting the number of days he physically spends inside the country. If you can grasp this one simple idea, you've basically unlocked the key to the entire Indian tax system. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll talk about why your physical presence, where you are, matters so much more than your passport. Then, we'll get into the specifics, the actual day-counting tests the law uses. After that, we'll figure out what it means to be an ordinary resident, and most importantly, why all this matters for your wallet. And finally, we'll touch on a couple of key exceptions to the rules. Okay, first things first, we have to get this core concept straight. When it comes to Indian income tax, the government really doesn't care that much about your passport. What they're really interested in is your calendar. And this is the absolute crucial difference. See, your citizenship, that's your passport. It's about your nationality, it determines your right to vote, but your residential status, that is a totally separate thing. It is purely a term for tax purposes, and it's decided by just one thing: how many days you are physically standing on Indian soil in a given year. And the law itself says it pretty clearly. You can be an Indian citizen but not a resident for tax purposes. And on the flip side, you could be a foreign citizen who is very much a resident when it comes to income tax. It's all about where you are, not who you are. So, how does this whole day counting thing actually work? All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty, the actual tests that determine if you're a resident for a financial year. It really just comes down to some simple math. The first test is, honestly, beautifully simple. Were you physically in India for 182 days or more during the financial year? If the answer is yes, that's it. Game over. You are a resident. End of story. But what if you were here for less time than that? Well, that's when we get to the second test, which is a little more involved. To be a resident under this rule, you have to hit both of these targets. It's not one or the other. First, you need to be in India for 60 days or more in the current year. And second, you also have to have been in India for a grand total of 365 days or more over the 4 years that came right before it. Let's see how this works with an example. Okay, to make this crystal clear, let's take a look at Andy. He's a British citizen, and he's been visiting India off and on for a few years. Our job is to figure out his tax status for the 2024-25 financial year. So let's do the math for Andy. In the current year, 2024-25, he was in India for 70 days. That's more than 60, so check, he's met the first condition. But now we have to look at the 4 years before that. We add it all up, 160 plus 80 plus 60 plus 55. That gives us a total of 355 days. And that is just shy of the 365-day requirements. So he fails the second condition. And because you have to meet both parts of that test, Andy is officially a non-resident for that year. See how that works? Failing just one of those two conditions changes everything for him. Now hold on, because being a resident isn't actually the end of the story. There's another layer to this. We have to figure out if a resident is ordinarily resident or not ordinarily resident. It's another distinction that makes a huge difference. The whole thing really works like a big funnel. Everybody starts at the top. That first set of day counting tests sorts you into one of two buckets, resident or non-resident. Now, if you land in the resident bucket, you're not done. You then move down to a second set of tests that decides if you're ordinarily resident or not ordinarily resident. So what does it take to get that ordinarily resident status? Well, you've got to clear two more hurdles. First, you need to have a track record. You must have been a resident in at least 2 out of the last 10 years. And second, you have to have been physically in India for at least 730 days. That's about 2 full years over the last 7 years. Again, if you fail even one of these, your status changes. Okay, so we've got all these different labels: resident, non-resident, ordinarily resident. You might be wondering, what's the point of all this? Well, it all boils down to one simple thing: how much of your money is actually taxable in India? So here's the bottom line. If you are a resident, an ordinarily resident, let's call it ROR, India taxes your global income, everything you make anywhere in the world. If you're a non-resident, or NR, it's the total opposite. You're only taxed on income that you earn or receive in India. And that middle category, RNOR, is kind of a hybrid between the two. Let's look at how this plays out in the real world. Everybody, no matter their status, pays tax on money they earn in India. That's a given. The real difference kicks in with your foreign income. So, say you own a property in London and you're getting rent from it. If you're an ROR, that rental income is taxable in India. But if you're an RNOR or an NOR, nope, it's completely off the hook. This is why getting your status right is so incredibly important. Now, you know what they say. For every rule, there's an exception. And tax law is full of them. So there are a few special cases where the standard day counting rules get a little simpler. For Indian citizens who are leaving the country specifically for a job or to work as a crew member on an Indian ship, the law basically cuts them a break. That whole complicated 60-day plus 365-day test, it just gets tossed out the window. For them, only that simple, straightforward 182-day rule matters. This makes it much easier for them to keep a non-resident status while they're working abroad. So look, if you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. When we're talking about Indian income tax, where your feet are is more important than where your passport is from. It's a system based on physical presence, plain and simple. At the end of the day, your calendar is the key. It's what unlocks your tax obligations in India. Every single day you spend here gets counted, and that final count is what determines which rules apply to you and just how much of your income is on the table for Indian tax. And that kind of brings us to a final big picture question. This whole system was designed for a world where your job and your location were tied together. But what about today? In an age of digital nomads, remote work, and careers that cross borders without a second thought, you have to ask, how long can a tax system based on just counting physical days in one spot really last? That's a question that tax authorities all over the globe are just now starting to wrestle with.